Shamdasani, now our spokesperson, and Rory Mungoven, the head of our Asia Pacific section, will continue taking your questions. So Ravina now has a response to one of the questions as well.
Thank you. Good morning and good afternoon. One of the questions was about some of the worst examples, and the High Commissioner, of course, painted a picture of just the scale of the brutality that occurred. The report is unfortunately full of individual examples of the brutality that people were subjected to. Among one of the most harrowing testimonies was that of a young woman in Jatrabari who was holding a wounded protester when a police officer executed him at point-blank range. When she screamed in horror, the officer turned his shotgun on her and fired again, causing severe injuries. And in another case, the security forces shot a young boy in his hand with a shotgun from point-blank range to punish him for throwing stones, and this completely mangled the young boy's hand.
Thank you, Ravina. So we'll go back online. We have a couple of more questions pending. So Israt from DBC, I see you've raised your hand again. Let's see if we can get it working this time. Israt, I see you're unmuted. Okay, maybe there is a problem your end on that. So we have we'll take another two questions. So we have a question from Salahuddin Ahmed, and then a question from Mustafa Yusuf.
Thank you for giving me the floor to talk about. Just I would like to know about police reform and governance issues from Bangladesh. And since the enacted, the Police Act of 1861 during British rule, multiple attempts have been made to reform Bangladesh policing system. Given that the police ordinance of 2007 was drafted but never enacted yet, should the interim government prioritize implementing it for meaningful police reform? Do you think so? If it is, please let me know your insights, please.
Thank you. And then the next question. Mustafa?
Hello, everybody. I'm Mustafa Yusuf. I work for the Banner News. It's a US government-funded news portal focusing on South Asia. My question is, could you be specific about the challenges the interim government might face to prosecute the perpetrators of July uprising, of July massacre? Thanks.
Sorry, the line was a bit muffled. Could you repeat the question?
Sure. Could you be specific about the challenges the interim government might face to prosecute the perpetrators of the July massacre? Thank you.
I'll pass over to Rory Mungoven, the head of the Asia Pacific section.
Thank you very much for the questions. And first on the police reform, which is really a key piece to this moving forward. And not just police reform, but reform to the security sector as a whole, because in Bangladesh, of course, one of the problems has been the militarization of policing and the addition of different forces, Rapid Action Battalion, Border Guards, ANSAR, other forces operating under military command or under the direction of the Prime Minister and senior executive. So this breakdown of independent policing, politicization of policing, has really been one of the significant root causes identified in our report. I mean, we really recommend a reform, very far-reaching overhaul of the whole security sector. There needs to be a change of approach in managing public order, not relying on these old colonial powers, and emphasizing less lethal forms of policing that de-escalate situations rather than lead to these confrontations. as High Commissioner said, there needs to be a prohibition on the use of shotguns with pellets and military weapons in policing public order. The policing system needs to be demilitarised. We recommend the disbandment of the Rapid Action Battalion, which has been responsible for violations not only during this period, but for many years in Bangladesh. And looking ahead, the establishment of a National Police Commission and independent bodies that could ensure accountability over the police, the border guards and other forces. We're very pleased that the government has appointed a reform commission on police, and we have seen that many of the recommendations that we are making align with what is coming through the Reform Commission. So we hope that this is one area where there can be substantial change, substantial progress. On the challenges to prosecuting people, I think we know that while the government has changed with the appointment of the interim government, the system has not necessarily changed, and many officials and people who had served or been appointed under the previous regime continue to function and often be needed across the different ministries. And this, of course, creates a kind of a potential conflict of interest. Of obstruction to the reforms or to the accountability responsible for investigating violations committed by police. Obviously, you have a major challenge. When you look at the courts, of course, the politicisation extended into the judiciary, many judicial appointments. The former government had compromised the independence of the judiciary. And the capacities of the key elements needed for accountability process. Of course, Bangladesh is significant, has its own international crimes tribunal, but of course the investigator prosecution capacity in the court, remains quite limited. We had an enormous challenge as an office to undertake this fact-finding over several months. We know the challenge that they are also facing as investigators in trying to pursue these cases. So I think there are many, institutional and capacity challenges for the justice sector in moving forward. As High Commissioner said, the office is really ready to support in this. And of course, Bangladesh can also look outwards to some of these other possibilities of international support from the International Criminal Court.
Actually, if I can just supplement what Rory has said. Concerns do remain. That is clear. As the High Commissioner pointed out, and as Rory pointed out, transitions are fragile, and there are still a lot of concerns about the current situation in Bangladesh, particularly with regard to due process and fair trial in the many cases that have been filed, custodial deaths in the unreformed prison system, actions taken against journalists, and persistent incidents as well of mob violence, including attacks on minorities. In terms of recommendations, the report contains a very comprehensive set of recommendations on institutional reform, law reform. One key recommendation is to take urgent measures to establish a victim and witness protection program that is independent of the existing security forces, and to initiate strict disciplinary measures and criminal investigations in cases of witness intimidation, because this is something we have witnessed quite a lot in Bangladesh.
Thank you, Ravina. We've actually got a question online. It's from Boris Engelson. He says, Bangladesh has been the place of a rampant civil war for more than half a century. What did or could so far the UN do to monitor the risks thereof and try to avoid this second or third or fourth bloodshed since the early 70s? And then we have two other questions online. If we could go first to Zima Islam and then M.A.K. Zilani.
Thank you so much. This is Zaima, and I work at the Daily Star. So my question is, did this very comprehensive investigation identify some of the perpetrators by name, and would the Commission be sharing some of these names with the judicial processes in Bangladesh as they try to bring the perpetrators to book, specifically seeing that Bangladesh still has the death penalty?
M.A.K. Zilani? I see you're still muted.
Thank you. Thank you. This is M.A.K. Zilani from Bangladesh, working for the Daily Shomoy Alo. My question is, what is the root causes of incident that occurred on July, August? And what type of instrument, basically military instrument, are used in that incident? And have any sniper uses or like this type? Please, what is your findings? Thank you.
Thank you. Rory?
Thank you very much. Just the first question. I mean, we wouldn't characterise the situation in Bangladesh as having been in civil war, but I think perhaps what you're reflecting is that Bangladesh has been caught in this trap of very binary politics, a kind of winner-takes-all politics that has really led to a very deep polarisation in the country and the capture of state institutions by government in power, and the weaponisation of the law and the state, often against the people, that has in turn also kind of created an enabling environment for corruption and the co-option of the economy for private interests and patronage. So I think all of these elements come together and have held the country hostage in many ways over many years. And I think as the High Commissioner said, but more importantly as the students have said, as Chief Advisor has said, this is an opportunity, historic opportunity, to break that cycle. And to break that cycle, to change the form of politics, governance, economy in Bangladesh, really requires this comprehensive acknowledgement of the past, reform of laws and institutions and of the system of governance, recreation of a civil society and civic space, but also democracy, even democracy within parties, to really cultivate a new democracy in Bangladesh. And I think this is a moment, historic moment, that the students have brought for the country. And I think the High Commissioner's offering our full support to realising that vision. The report doesn't identify perpetrators as such. I mean, of course, there are senior officials named in the report, different moments, different meetings. As High Commissioner said, this is a human rights investigation, not an individual criminal investigation. Of course, we have retained huge amount of material and evidence from this work. It's being very carefully archived and kept according to the highest standards, so that it could be used in a future accountability process. And yes, on your question about cooperating with judicial processes going forward, this really depends on 2 or 3 things. One, of course, the consent of victims and of the people who've given us information to share that information, their protection, that it's safe to do so, that they won't face some reprisal. Secondly, that the process must be credible, fair, must meet the international standards of fair trial. And thirdly, as you rightly said, the issue of the death penalty is a problem for us. We oppose the death penalty in all circumstances, and as a UN policy, we're constrained from cooperating with processes, with trials that can result in the death penalty. So this is a constraint. The interim government is aware of that. We hope that this whole process will lead to some reflection, debate, reconsideration of the death penalty in Bangladesh, which we think is actually part of this cycle of revenge. And root causes, look, so many issues identified in the report. I mean, of course, the protests themselves came out of this student protest over the reintroduction of a quota system of employment for government jobs that favoured families and descendants of the ruling party. But it reflected much broader grievances that had become very pent up in the society over a long time. And I think these relate back to some of the things I said about the nature of politics, the high levels of corruption at high level, but also at a day-to-day level, the lack of opportunity, of employment, jobs. This is a country that's moving towards middle income. You have a fantastic young generation coming through universities with all sorts of new skills, and without necessarily the opportunities for employment. The suffocation of a lot of small, medium enterprise by this whole oligarchic approach to the economy. And also, I think, the fact that these restrictive laws, the controls on social media, the suppression of independent journalism, all of this had built up really, I think, to a point of explosion. I think when we visited Bangladesh, even in 2022 with the former High Commissioner, Michelle Bachelet, you could feel this tension building in the society. Of course, the elections in January of 2024 were very polarised and took place in an environment of suppression. And so I think all of these ingredients really were the fuel to which the student protest sort of ignited. And I think this is signified as well in how, after the 17th, 18th of July, the protest broadened from the students to a much more mass movement that was reflective really of all sectors of the society and all of the different socioeconomic groups. In terms of weapons, I mean, we have quite a bit of information in the report, and I encourage you to look at it closely. And High Commissioner gave you a few of the statistics there, which were striking. 78% of the fatalities were caused by firing, and of that, 66% were caused by military rifles, and 12% by shotguns with pellets. So that's about close to 80%. And the things we find, you'll see in the research, is not only the weapons that were used, but how they were used. So this pattern of, for instance, firing obviously indiscriminately into crowds, but also firing above the torso, and often at angles that were designed to hit the protesters rather than to disperse the protesters. And of course, as Ravina mentioned, there's some horrible examples as well of protesters or bystanders being killed, at very, very short range with very high-powered weapons. So I think you will see there, this prevalence use of military-grade weaponry was a key factor in the high level of fatalities that were recorded.